Thank you so much for those who have joined and are joining. We're going to give a couple of minutes to give some time for the others who are rushing to join the debrief. Thank you so much for being online and being patient. We'll be right back. All right, I think a couple of minutes have passed. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Silvia Mantilla. I am from the World Federation for Animals, and I will be moderating today's debrief on the third UN Ocean Conference, UNOC3, which just wrapped up last week. Whether you followed the conference closely or you're just catching up now, we really hope this space helps you connect the dots on what happened at UNOC and what it means for animals. Did you all know that cleaner wrasse are capable of recognizing themselves in the mirror? Dolphins can too. And did you all know that when humpback whales get caught in fishing gear, their companions often stay close and try to help? Some octopuses have been observed teaming up with fish to hunt and punching the ones who don't seem to cooperate to keep them on task. Marine animals are clever. They're complex. They feel, and it matters to them. So for those of you who don't know us, we are the World Federation for Animals, a global coalition of over 70 NGOs working to ensure that these trillions of individual beings have a voice in global policy spaces. From climate to biodiversity to health and food system discussions, animals are often left out of these conversations. But their welfare is absolutely central to our planet's health and resilience, including that of our ocean. Last week in Nice, with Ed, with Julia, and many of our WFA members, we were wondering, will the world's policies actually reflect this reality? So we're going to find out today. But before we get into that, we're just going to do a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We have interpretation in Spanish and French. So just click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to select your language. You may need to click on the 3 dots to see the globe icon. The session is being recorded and we'll share the recording afterwards, although we hope you stay till the end. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. In fact, I encourage you to. Tell us your name, where you're joining from, and if you're representing an organization, which organization you represent. We're going to hear from our speakers first and then open up for questions later towards the end. But throughout, we encourage you to drop your questions in the Q&A box or drop your thoughts in the chat as we go. Our team is going to do their best to monitor all the questions and wonderful comments you may have, and we'll try to get back to them towards the end of the event. Also, we'll do a very quick interactive poll before we conclude, so stay with us till the end. Your feedback is going to be very important for us. So, as is on the screen, before we start, why is UNOC important for animals? So UNOC is a conference, a high-level conference that brings together governments, scientists, civil society to accelerate action towards the protection and sustainable use of our oceans, basically to support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water. And thus, it shapes the international agenda on how countries work on challenges that affect the welfare and the survival of marine animals. For example, marine pollution, sustainable fishing, overfishing. UNOC, which happened in Nice, ended with the adoption of a new political declaration whose title, Our Ocean, Our Future, United for Urgent Action. And apart from the political declaration, we also saw hundreds of voluntary commitments by countries, UN agencies, civil society. And today, we're going to explore what some of this means for animals, what was included in the declaration, what we were happy to see among those commitments, what was missing, and what comes next for us. And to help us do that, we're very lucky to be joined by two of my wonderful colleagues, Julia Malherbe, Head of Global Policy at the Aquatic Life Institute, and Ed Goodall, Head Intergovernmental Engagement at Whale and Dolphin Conservation. Thank you so much, Julia and Ed, for joining us today. The two of them are going to help us get the inside track on what happened and what didn't. So with that, I think maybe we get started. Enough of me. Ed, perhaps we can start on a positive note, and if you can help us with an outline in terms of the positive references that we saw in that political declaration from a marine animal protection perspective.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Sylvia, and hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So firstly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about ghost gear, which is one of the most urgent and overlooked threats to marine wildlife, really. And ghost gear is fishing gear that's been abandoned, lost, or deliberately discarded at sea, and also known, as we love an acronym, as ALDFG. That gear continues to catch and kill marine life indiscriminately long after it's been lost. It entangles turtles, seals, whales, sharks, birds, and countless more fish, causing immense suffering and slow, painful deaths. And ghost gear is not really thought about as part of a bigger problem, but it is part of the bigger marine plastic pollution crisis that is ongoing, that has much more expansive threats to marine wildlife. So it's encouraging to see that the issue is receiving visibility in UN spaces now, and it deservedly got a mention in the Nice Ocean Action Plan at UNOC. So the text calls on major organizations, notably the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, to take the matter seriously and begin integrating it into global policy discussions. And that includes considering ghost gear as part of the UN Plastics Treaty, which is aiming to address the full life cycle of plastic products, not just the bits that we end up seeing on beaches. And that matters because too often fishers are faced with no accessible or affordable ways to dispose of their old fishing gear. And in many regions, they have to pay out of their own pocket to dispose of worn nets and lines, which is an obvious disincentive. And as a result, some gear is dumped at sea. And if governments truly intend to address the entire life cycle of plastic, then they must implement practical and incentivized gear retrieval and disposal systems. Otherwise, we're just setting the fishers up to fail, and marine animals will continue to pay the consequences of that. I also just wanted to raise the alarm about fish aggregating devices, or FADs. And these are bundles of old fishing gear and plastic debris that are intentionally floated in the ocean and left there floating perhaps for months at a time. And the idea of these devices is that they attract fish who shelter underneath them. And while they may serve a commercial purpose, they're effectively sanctioned ocean litter, and up to 120,000 of them are deployed every single year. And as they degrade, they contribute to that very plastic crisis that we're trying to solve. And they weren't mentioned in the declaration, but are effectively a form of ghost gear. But that being said, ghost gear is getting attention at a UN level, and several countries were speaking out about the harms from ghost gear at UNOC. So we've got an opportunity. And by continuing to spotlight this issue and push for action and not just words, we can move forward towards policies that genuinely protect marine life from this kind of silent killer. Then on to 30 by 30. So the declaration reaffirmed the importance of the 30 by 30 targets, which come from the Convention of Biological Diversity's Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was agreed in 2022. And the commitment to protect 30% of marine and coastal areas has the potential to be transformative, not just for marine ecosystems, but for the communities, local economies, and animals that depend on them being protected. But at the moment, only 8.3% of the ocean is actually designated as marine protected areas, and only 2.8% is considered actually effectively protected. So that means that the vast majority of the ocean remains open to unregulated or poorly managed activities at a time when overfishing, habitat destruction, pollution, and climate change are pushing marine biodiversity to the brink. Now, the 30 by 30 commitment is important, but I think it's important to be clear that as animal advocates and environment protection advocates, we really must see it as a floor and not a ceiling. It's a minimum, not a maximum. We're 5 years away from the deadline in 2030, and we're still a long way from achieving it. And even when we do, 70% of the ocean will remain vulnerable unless we shift the way that we're thinking about protection. Now, I was at an event last week in Nice, and a new task force was launched that it really resonated with this way of thinking because it was all around the protection principle. And rather than treating protection as the exception, we should begin from a position that the ocean is protected by default. And under that model and thinking, it would be up to industry to demonstrate that their activities will not cause harm, rather than relying on people like us in civil society or scientists to prove that the damage has been done after it's already occurred. But that's a major mindset shift, but it fully aligns with our welfare-centric approach here at WDC and at WFA, but it also aligns with the urgency of the moment and the scale of the challenge that we're up against. So I think, and maybe some of you will agree, that 30 by 30 should be seen as a global proof of concept and a demonstration that coordinated action is possible, but it should only be the beginning. And we should be looking to go much further than that in the future. So that we can protect marine life and protect much larger areas of the ocean. So on to the third item. Reaching the goal of 30% protection by 2030 depends on more than ambition. It requires the legal ability to act for countries. And one of the most urgent steps in securing protection for the high seas, which is those vast areas of remote ocean that lie beyond country borders, they need protecting. And currently, countries have the power to manage and protect their waters, which only extend 200 miles from their land borders. But beyond that, covering 60% of the whole ocean, there's been no global legal framework to create marine protected areas for the benefit of animals and habitats. That was until last year. So after 2 decades of negotiations, the international community achieved a major breakthrough with the agreement of the High Seas Treaty, which is known formally as the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, or BBNJ agreement. And this treaty creates the tools needed to establish protected areas in the high seas, enabling collective stewardship of areas that were once considered lawless. The declaration rightly calls on countries to consider ratifying the High Seas Treaty, but to truly deliver on the promise of 30 by 30, it should be going beyond really a passive consideration. It should be an urgent priority for countries to move forward with this. And to bring the treaty into force, we need at least 60 countries to ratify it. Ratification is not just a symbolic move, it's a legal and legislative process requiring each country to integrate the treaty into their own domestic laws. And that can be quite complex, but it's absolutely essential, as without entry into force, the UN, the United Nations, can't put in place the institutional structures or funding mechanisms needed to implement protections on the high seas that will benefit wild animals. So as of the end of UNOC, 51 countries had ratified the treaty, with another 17 reportedly undergoing that process. So that brings us tantalizingly close to that 60 needed, and perhaps we'll reach it, I heard, by the UN General Assembly in New York later on this year. So this is a real moment of a rare opportunity of rare window of opportunity, and we have to be pushing these countries to act swiftly to ratify the High Seas Treaty and bring it into their own national laws. Otherwise, we're going to find it impossible to actually get to 30 by 30. So I think we can take heart that there is progress and reaffirmation of some of the issues that we've discussed there being mentioned. But it's our job as civil society and animal advocates to be holding these countries to account to go beyond these measures that they've agreed to last week.
Thank you so much, Ed. And in fact, it was such a wonderful development to see that I almost would not want to pass on to the next part of our conversation and end on such a hopeful note, cautious optimism. But obviously, and not to say that these were small positive bits of news, they were really significant. But then there were other issues that we, have been talking about, you, Ed, and with Julia, in terms of things that we wish we would have seen more of, not only in the declaration, but also in the conversations at UNOC and more commitments from countries. So on that note, I bring in Julia to, share with us a little bit on your reflections on, as we have on the screen, were animals truly left out of the conversation at UNOC?
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Ed, for walking us through, let's say, the most positive outcomes of the declaration. I'm definitely ready to bring the mood down and start discussing what wasn't in the declaration, which unfortunately is equally important. I would agree with you, though, that on the surface, the declaration does sound promising. For example, the text calls for decisive and collective action for sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and it does name problems like you guys mentioned, such as overfishing, or IUU, which stands for illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. But if we take a closer look, I would say that decisive action is exactly what's missing from it, right? There are no commitments to phase out the most destructive practices. The declaration doesn't even use some words, for example, bottom trawling or bycatch, which I would say are probably two of the most harmful and widespread and well-documented threats to marine life today. And allow me just to maybe simplify, but just to give a very brief explanation of these two terms that I've used, because I think we should all get more familiar with them. So bottom trawling is a method that drags heavy nets across the seafloor. So this, of course, flattens habitats and just kills everything in its path. Of course, many animals, from fish, rays, and crustacean, are generally crushed or they suffocate slowly after hours that they are being dragged in these nets. Unfortunately, this practice, which I would say it's concerning by itself, it's actually allowed in many so-called protected areas, which is even more concerning when you think about it. Bycatch actually refers to animals that are unintentionally caught in fishing gear that was meant for other species. So again, I'm talking about dolphins, sea turtles, seabirds, and countless of fish. They are generally discarded, injured, or probably already dead back into the water. And I mean, from a food security point of view, this is clearly like wasteful, but from an animal perspective, this is clear avoidable suffering on a massive scale. But despite this, neither of these terms appear in the declaration. And this silence is quite worrying, honestly, because I feel that sometimes like some forms of harm are almost too politically inconvenient for us to name them, even when they are, scientifically proven and like ethically urgent. As Ed mentioned, marine protected areas are another great example because, yes, the declaration does reaffirm the 30 by 30 goal. So again, protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030, but it says nothing about banning harmful practices within those areas. So to me, a protected area that allows bottom trawling is not protected. I see it as a loophole, right? I also want to bring you guys a little bit of positive news, because some governments, as we mentioned, did step up during the conference. So just to bring you to 3 examples, Ghana announced that it would ban bottom trawling and all industrial fishing in its waters. The UK committed to banning bottom trawling in 41 marine protected areas, which cover more or less 30,000 square kilometers. And France also introduced new protections across 15,000 square kilometers of strictly protected waters. Of course, these pledges are important, but again, I think they also highlight how shy maybe the declaration was, because we were chatting about this with some colleagues right after UNOC. If individual countries can act, why is the global framework afraid of even speaking these names, right? I know we have a lot to unpack in just this hour, so I want to move on and speak to directly what the declaration leaves out entirely, which is animal welfare. And I really get fired up about this because aquatic animals are sentient beings. These animals can feel pain, they can feel fear, they can feel stress. This is not a debate anymore. This is established in science and increasingly in legislation. The declaration does not reflect that. Not once is the word welfare used. Not once there is a mention of this need to reduce suffering. And not once is we acknowledge that trillions of animals are directly affected by these policies that the declaration itself claims to address. And just to be a little bit more maybe practical, to give you an example, what, for example, we would like to see in a declaration like that. We would like to see a call for humane slaughter standards. We would like to see a call for better handling and better capture methods. We would like to see monitoring or a call for monitoring or reducing welfare harms, both in aquaculture and wild capture systems. I also want to touch very briefly on aquaculture as well, because aquaculture is actually actively promoted in the declaration. It's called one of key pillars when it comes to ocean-based economies and a solution for food security. But again, it still leaves a blank, leaves a gap on how this system operates today, which is sometimes incompatible with the most basic welfare. There's overcrowded tanks, oxygen deprivation, there's no stunning at slaughter. This is unfortunately the reality for many farmed fish. So again, this is what I mean when I say that sometimes sustainability at this UN level is often defined in production terms, not really ethical ones. And we mentioned a little bit on the FAO because it's mentioned in the declaration for the work that they've been doing on ghost gear. And during the UN Ocean Conference, they released a global fisheries report, which again focuses entirely on stock levels, on trade. There is not one line on welfare. Similarly, if we take a look at the FAO Blue Transformation Roadmap, which is supposed to guide the future of our aquatic food systems, there is no reference of sentience, there is no reference of humane treatment. So I arrived at the point that I don't think welfare is forgotten. I think is somehow intentionally excluded because it's uncomfortable to speak about this topic. Yeah, I just also want to highlight that the declaration references really the value that the ocean has for us, right? So for food, for trade, for jobs, for climate resilience. But what about the animals that live in the ocean, right? The ones that are caught, farmed, and killed. They are never valued for their own sake. They are invisible to these discussions. So I don't know, but when the text refers to marine biodiversity, species, natural resources, I almost have the impression that we are reducing lives to commodities. And this is not just a policy gap. It's not just a language gap. It's a values gap. And to me, it explains why so many harmful practices are still allowed to date. Because, if we don't respect marine life as life, which begins with acknowledging that there are beings with the capacity to suffer, maybe it becomes easier to justify practices that inflict suffering without scrutiny. And yeah, of course, this mindset doesn't stop with fisheries and aquaculture. There are other issues that we should discuss about. And I want to bring it back, Ed, to just dive us back into how the declaration treats deep sea mining. So Ed, back to you.
Thanks, Julia. Every time I hear you speak, I just feel like you should become the president of the ocean. It's so engaging and resonates with me deeply. So one of the most striking omissions in the declaration is the failure to explicitly call for the precautionary approach or a moratorium on deep sea mining. And the declaration notes that the International Seabed Authority's progress on developing rules for deep sea mineral exploitation and environmental protection, but it stops short of urging the caution that the science, the UN themselves, in the text of the original Rio Conventions, and common sense actually demands. And that is a real cause for concern. So the International Seabed Authority has a mandate to manage the international seabed, which is often described as the common heritage of mankind, or humankind, it should be. But increasingly, its dual role to promote and regulate deep sea mining is coming under scrutiny, particularly as mining applications advance before robust rules or scientific assessments are actually even in place. The deep sea is one of the least understood ecosystems on the whole planet and one of the most vulnerable. It's home to incredible life forms, many that are found absolutely nowhere else. And it plays a crucial role in regulating the planet's climate and nutrient cycles. And scientists have been sounding the alarm that mining the seabed for metals could cause irreversible damage, including species extinction of species that we haven't even discovered yet, habitat loss, and the collapse of fragile, slow recovering ecosystems. And we simply don't know enough to move forward with this risk. The absence of a precautionary stance in the declaration sends a really troubling signal that the industrial exploitation of the deep ocean may well outpace the science needed to inform its protection. And it doesn't sound great, but there are reasons to remain hopeful. So momentum is building amongst individual countries who, for the last couple of years, have been calling for this precautionary standpoint and a moratorium. And during the conference, the number of individual countries supporting a precautionary pause or a moratorium on deep seabed mining rose to 37, with 23 of those at UNOC issuing a joint statement. And this marks a growing global recognition that the deep ocean must not become a testing ground for unchecked extraction. And as I said earlier, on marine protected areas, precaution must be more than just a principle. It should be our baseline approach, especially where ecosystems and animals living in them are so poorly understood and potentially irreplaceable. The lives of countless species and individuals that inhabit the deep sea, many of which, like I said, we've yet to even discover, are at stake with this new industry. And once disturbed, these ecosystems may never recover within human timescales. There was some initial deep seabed mining extraction that was done 30 years ago. And there was a diving team that went there and filmed the state of that habitat in the last couple of years. And it looks like it did the day after it happened. It's complete destruction and nothing living there at all. So as we stand at this threshold of what could become the largest mining operation in history, we have to ask ourselves, well, are we prepared to sacrifice that biodiversity that we barely understand for minerals that we might not even need? So that was a really disappointing omission in the text, but we are encouraged that more and more countries are speaking up and taking a stronger approach to rally against this dangerous new industry. So on to the next topic, underwater noise pollution. So in the ocean, noise is a huge issue, especially for animals that I am very lucky to work on behalf of, like whales and dolphins. They rely on it to feed and communicate. And the declaration acknowledges underwater radiated noise from ships and supports the work of the International Maritime Organization to address that issue. And it's an important step, given that shipping is the leading source of ocean noise pollution, and the industry is expanding into pristine ecosystems like the Arctic as the summer ice sheets recede. It's opening up new areas for shipping, and we're bringing noise into these parts of the ocean where there never has been noise before. But the text only mentions noise from shipping and completely overlooks noise from other harmful sources like seismic surveys for fossil fuel exploration and extraction and military sonar, which are also proven to cause stress, disorientation, hearing loss, and death in all sorts of marine animals. And by omitting those threats, the declaration really misses a critical opportunity to strengthen protections for marine species from the whole array of noise pollution in the ocean. But despite that lack of progressive consensus in the declaration, similar to deep sea mining, 37 countries joined a new high ambition coalition for a quiet ocean led by Canada and Panama last week, signaling this growing recognition that we need to address underwater noise pollution. And the coalition calls for stronger regulations, soundscape protection, and practical mitigation measures, and represents a level of progress that we're hopeful we can tackle this issue on. In particular, they're behind advancing quieter ship design by the International Maritime Organization, and that includes creating more efficient engines for ships and utilizing wind. So we traded goods as civilizations across the ocean for centuries using only sailboats, and then completely forgot about how to do that over the last 100 years or so. But there are projects underway to attach wind assist sails to shipping container ships to reduce engine power and use. So kind of using nature to our advantage to protect nature, which is quite nice. They also importantly call for noise reduction measures to reduce impacts on sensitive marine species in particular, and the creation and management of noise issues, regulations to address noise specifically within marine protected areas. So again, a little bit like deep sea mining, this is a positive move made by a smaller progressive group of countries rather than the entirety of the UN countries that were present at UNOC, but we really have to push them, and especially within this high ambition coalition, they need to go beyond shipping noise and trying to tackle this issue holistically. So I think overall at UNOC is a bit of a mixed bag for animals, especially in the declaration, but we do see this kind of positive speaking out from smaller groups of countries to start engaging with measures that are going to start integrating animals and their welfare more centrally into UN processes. So yeah, it was a pleasure to be there. It was a pleasure to work with the WFA team, and look forward to UNOC #4 in South Korea in 3 years' time. Back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Ed. It's really humbling, the amount of work that we have ahead, and yeah, it was a real privilege, I think, as you said towards the end, because it's a real privilege to be doing this work for animals. As humbling and as overwhelming as it may be sometimes of what we have ahead, is a real privilege to do it for them. I think maybe what I want to do now is ask everyone to don't be shy, drop any questions or thoughts or comments. Maybe you followed up close the conference and you want to share your thoughts as well on the chat. We really want this to feel as much as a conversation as we can. So feel free to drop your questions. I'm just going to mention that after taking a couple of questions, we'll go to Julia to continue that last bit that Ed, you were mentioning in terms of what's next. Because before UNOC3, there'll be a number of policy moments ahead in which we can continue bringing this topic forward. There is a question from Sakia Rashid. Where can we find a list of the countries that joined the Quiet Ocean Coalition? Perhaps somebody from the WFA team can share the link to the website of the coalition. We'll be happy to share, and yeah, we'll make sure we share that. But I think we linked to it in the article that we published, where apologies, somebody may have already shared it in the chat, but if not, at WFA we did a recap of all the developments that Ed and Julia helped us understand today, and some more on our website. And there we have also the link to the coalition. So be sure to look for that. We have another question. How can we make sure that protection will be real rather than just a race to 30% without consideration of the quality of protection? Are there any mechanisms to monitor the quality of this? Yeah, happy to hear thoughts from you both, Julia, what you think, what we can do to make sure that this protection is real.
I can try if you want. So the United Kingdom last week announced that they were going to ban bottom trawling in a bunch of marine protected areas in the UK, which is something that many NGOs in the country have been calling for a while. But the devil is always in the detail. So it was announced that this is going to happen, but we don't know whether it will be time bound. We don't know whether bottom trawling is even taking place in those areas in the first place. So it's up to us, I think, as civil society and NGOs and just citizens of the world to engage in this consultation process as they open up, as they announce new protections and new measures, for us to really go through and ensure that they aren't just nice announcements for press releases and photo moments at these events, because it can take years to implement marine protected areas properly and all of the enforcement that is required. So it's not an easy process, but we just have to consistently speak up and hold these decision makers to account to ensure that those protected areas are indeed actually protected in a meaningful way for animals.
Thank you, Ed. We have another question. Perhaps this can go to you, Julia, because I think you've been doing some work on this. How can we keep the big industry in line, given that they do not consider the issues at stake, but rather call them lies? What can we do to hold them accountable?
Well, thanks for the question. That's, I would say, a big chunk of our work at Aquatic Life Institute in specific. So, well, there's not one way, I think, to drive change. And this also comes with, as you said, keeping industry accountable. Maybe just to be devil's advocate for a second, I would say that I have seen, experience firsthand, quite of being open to discussion from a lot of industry representatives. So maybe from personal experience, I would say, don't approach the conversation thinking that, you're not going to go ahead with your points, because many times your arguments are actually going to be taken into the discussion. Like in this case, they might not make it in the final text of the declaration, but that's what we've been talking about all week. So we've engaged with people that are open to this type of discussions. To go back to what we can do, I believe that especially NGOs have a key role to play. And to me, the easiest answer is collaboration. Put yourself in the difficult positions, put yourself to speak with people that don't agree with you, with the objective, not necessarily to change their minds, but just provide an additional perspective, which maybe they've just never considered. It doesn't need to go one against the other. We often face this type of debate when we talk about our work, for example, with small-scale fishers or indigenous communities. I definitely believe that this type of stakeholders should have a saying, should have a voice, because they haven't had that so far. And I want to do that with them. So maybe it's more of an approach of what we can do as NGO, putting ourselves in a collaborative space and just being open to the discussion. Maybe just keeping in mind that sometimes our objective will simply be to put a foot in the door, right? So to get people to think about aquatic animal welfare. And I think this would be a very big first step.
Thank you, Julia. Let me just look if we have, just look at the time and then some questions. Okay, this is an interesting one. Well, there are a couple. Perhaps I can just briefly touch onto this. One is, what are the places to align UNOC with UNFCCC? And for those of you who are not familiar with the acronym of UNFCCC, that's the climate convention, at which where I am right now. I am in Bonn for the mid-year talks under the UNFCCC, the UN framework for Convention on Climate Change. In fact, what happened at UNOC, the political declaration, informs something that's been happening actually yesterday and today, which is the Ocean and Climate Dialogue. It's an annual dialogue, and I think you've been part of that dialogue in the past years, and that's where we can see that kind of like information coming in across policy spaces. I don't know if you would add a little bit on the Ocean Dialogue, Ed, even though I'm fully aware you're not at this year's Ocean Climate Dialogue, but perhaps based on your previous experience of the dialogue, that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. I remember being in Glasgow for COP26 when there was, for the first time really within the texts of the agreement of a COP, there was some really important and much needed mentions of ocean, but they were very broad, mostly just about the ocean itself, how it affects weather systems, its interactions with the atmosphere. Nothing in there on animals or biodiversity, really. But what it did do is open up this annual dialogue, which happens in Bonn, and I believe this is now the fourth one, or maybe the third. But in previous ones, I have found them to be quite disappointing. I'm sad to report they are very much a dialogue, and it seems like countries come along to present good things that they've done that have climate co-benefits, and not a lot of action. But I was heartened to join some of the preparatory meetings for this year's dialogue. It's a shame that I can't be there, but I know that the intention for this year's dialogue was to be about taking all of this evidence and now transforming that into action. So I'm very much looking forward to reading the transcripts and the report from the dialogue this year, and I hope that there are some meaningful actions that will be announced by countries and by the UNFCCC themselves to take forward ocean climate action.
Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, and we'll be trying to report as well as much as we can from here, from Bonn. Just briefly opening the chat. I do want to mention, though, if we do not get to all the questions today, what we're going to try to do is at the end leave our email address of WFA, and would be great to for you to get in touch with us, and we would love to get back to you on those questions that may be pending. There's some nice comments just generally on how wonderful you, Ed, and Julia have been today in explaining. There's a question on, wait, sorry, this was moving very fast. Are there key sectors in industry that can influence and encourage changes to practice? Don't know who, both Julia, perhaps you want to take that on?
Yeah, Sure. Again, thank you for, I did spot that question, and I was hoping you'd call on me to answer that because I didn't finish maybe my train of thought in the previous question. Sorry, I get very passionate and I get carried away. But what I wanted to say is that at Aquatic Life Institute, we actually operate through different programs. So as of course, I deal with everything that regards global policy, but we have a corporate engagement program, we have a certification program, and these are all sectors where we are pushing for change that then is gonna also drive change on a bigger scale. So I know you specifically asked about the insurance sector. I am not an expert on this, but I can share that we've been engaging, especially in this past 6-7 months, with a couple of financial institutions, I guess I should say, mostly to educate them on aquatic animal welfare risks in financing certain type of projects, whether it's building a new farm, investing in specific practices. And most of the time, well, actually all of the time, their answer was, whoa, we never thought about this. This is incredibly interesting. Okay, we'll think about it. So my next objective with this is to really figure out how to put this considerations, so aquatic animal welfare considerations within what they usually call, for example, sustainability criteria. I think it should be in there, right? Not just for aquatic animals, but like animal welfare in general. There are different avenues that I think we can take to do so. And again, like I think it goes back to what I was saying before, collaboration. So working with different sectors, trying to tackle the problem at different levels is hopefully, at least in our view, what is gonna advance the issue forward.
Thank you, Julia. I don't know if my team is going to say, if the team is going to say, no, Sylvia, we have to move on. But I see one question that just came in, and I think, Julia, would be great if you can answer this one, which is, I love it. Was there still the overcurrent, pun intended, of fishing and aquaculture as the answers to world hunger? And I think this one is one that you will feel passionate about, and we've talked at length about it. So yeah, it would be great if you can comment on that one.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I know Ed has also thoughts on this, so maybe he also wants to add something, but definitely. So unfortunately, a narrative that was pretty predominant, I would say, throughout UNOC is this emphasis on blue foods, which again, it's used as a blanket word, but what does it mean in practice? Are we talking about algae or are we talking about salmon farming? Because it's two very different things. But yeah, this push for blue foods presented as the solution, honestly, not just to food security, but I've heard like representatives from member states saying, oh yeah, it's going to boost our economy. So it's great for people, it's great for jobs. Again, all of this us, it's very useful for us human. And of course, I think this narrative misses a piece, right? So we're really talking about how using those resources instead of valuing them for what they are. So yeah, unfortunately, I would say a lot of push, especially on the financial aspect of it, saying things like, oh, we need to invest a lot on more production of blue foods, which I'm not entirely sure what it means, but it is a little bit worrying. Maybe just again, to be devil's advocate, I've also heard very few but promising points of, some important stakeholders that said, but we also should look at the consumption of blue foods. We also shouldn't be like depleting the fish populations just to get what we want. So these are promising, I would say, encouraging points that I definitely think should be expanded. I don't know, Ed, if you want to expand more on the narrative on blue foods.
I think just echoing what you've said there, Julia. I think there are multiple coastal communities around the world who rely on sea animals as their primary source of protein, and they simply can't get their food from anywhere else. But I think the vast majority of people don't need seafood. There's plenty of alternative ways to get all of the nutrients and protein that we need. And there seems, speaking personally, just a complete disconnect between the expansion of industry for profit and the individual suffering that's going to occur as a result of that. And I think that is something that we're trying to get more into the equation, that these are not just blue foods. It's a marketing term that kind of makes it sound all okay. These are individual animals with individual lives, thoughts, emotions, feelings, and we have to respect that. And yeah, I'm just really enjoying working with you guys to bring that notion into the equation.
Thank you both. There are some questions pending, but I promise personally I will make sure that these are answered to you with the help of Ed and Julia. But for now, I think that we do not want to close this conversation today on this note. There's a lot that we can do ahead, and we should look forward and be encouraged by some of the positive steps that we've seen, and all the opportunities that lie ahead. So Julia, take us forward.
Yes, so I was tasked with trying and give you guys an answer. So where do we go from here? As you probably heard, the UN Ocean Conference gave us a declaration that calls itself urgent and ambitious, while not naming the beings that are mostly affected by the way we use our ocean. So again, I don't think this is just an oversight. I think it's a structural omission. But the good news is that's what we're here to change, right? So World and Dolphin Conservation, Aquatic Life Institute, World Federation for Animals, really our goal is to make sure that aquatic animal welfare is no longer invisible when we work within international policy. And this in practicality means pushing for welfare standards in fisheries and aquaculture. It means for sentience to be acknowledged and recognized. And it really means for animals to be protected, not just as part of the ecosystem, but as individuals, right? Individuals with moral standing. And more practically, here you see in the slide some of the important opportunities that we have identified, as Sylvia mentioned before, way before the next UNOC. So I'll just give you guys a very brief overview of this. So the high-level political forum, which is happening in July. This is an event where the SDG 14 and SDG 2 will be reviewed. SDG 14, again, is the one that focuses on life below water. So again, here we can push for this blue food system to make sure that they include sentience, that includes welfare, not just nutrition and yield, which are generally what's discussed. The UN General Assembly, it's then happening in September. It will focus on the High Seas Treaty, which Ed touched on before. And again, it would be interesting to advocate for, again, welfare to be included or at least considered when it comes to the implementation of the High Seas Treaty. So again, it doesn't just become another instrument about biodiversity without addressing the lives. COP30 in Brazil is happening in this November. Here, I hope we will see ocean-based climate action really accelerating. I've heard the president of COP30 at UNOC saying that COP30 will also be an ocean COP. So that makes me pretty promising. And we're working to insert.
Sorry to interrupt. For everybody online who may not be familiar with COP as an acronym, just quickly to say that is the Conference of the Parties. So it is the gathering of all governments that are countries that are parties to the UNFCCC. Sorry, just to quickly, so that because what you're saying is super important. So I don't want people to miss on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. And sorry, folks, if we've used acronyms, but I would say put a message in the chat if something sounds very weird and odd, and we'll try to explain it. Sometimes I also forget what the acronyms mean, so forgive us for that. But yeah, the last thing that we already touched on is the UN Ocean and Climate Dialogue, which, as Sylvia mentioned, is actually being discussed, I think, in like 5 minutes, where Sylvia is. And again, it's another opportunity to reinforce that animal welfare can also be presented as a climate justice issue. Now, I wanted to end maybe in a more, positive note, because I think I want to leave with you guys with this idea that working in this space, like especially on a policy perspective, it goes a little bit beyond from inserting welfare language into declarations, right? It's really about shifting the story, a story from where ocean is seen as a resource to one where it's really recognized as a living being, as a living system that deserves protection, deserves respect, deserves compassion. So if there's one thing that we hope you'll take away from today's debrief, is that the ocean is not just full of resources, it's filled with lives, and these lives matter. So I really look forward to keep doing more of this work with all of you. And I think now, Sylvia, I can pass it back to you to officially close our webinar.
Thank you, Julia. And Ed, you both were really wonderful speakers. It's been such a pleasure to work with you on this and these and preparing this. Thank you, everybody who made the time to listen to this conversation and share your thoughts and questions on the chat. Please, before we close, before you leave, we'd love your responses to a quick poll, which should pop up on your screen now. It's just 2 short questions. It'll only take a few seconds. These responses are really important for us because they will help shape up future sessions of debriefs on similar processes such as UNOC in the future. And we want to really keep this conversation growing for animals, which I'm sure that's why you're all here today with us. And if you would like to know more in the meantime about WFA events, please join our mailing list, which I see is coming up in the chat. And so you can just subscribe. Thank you again, and very proud to say that we've finished on time. We hope to see many of you again. Thank you all.